So we'll kick off the session now. The main session itself will go for 30 minutes. And then from there, we'll have some questions. So feel free to be able to ask any questions in the question section. The team will get those to me and I'll read them out to Reianna. And to introduce Reianna Vercoe is effectively the subject matter expert of STP2 and generally around payroll compliance for Aurion payroll. And I'll let her do some introductions for Aurion generally, but I've worked with Reianna for some time now, and I mean her knowledge, particularly in these areas, is unprecedented. She's worked with hundreds of organisations around payroll compliance generally, and certainly STP2 has been a main focus of hers over the last 6 to 12 months, and really preparing organisations and getting ready for it. So it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Reianna today. Reianna, thanks so much for your time.
Good to be here. Nice to meet, nice to be with you again, James, and nice to meet everybody on the call.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thank you again. This is one of those really interesting topics because it's a real change that organisations really need to be aware of. And I know that we have run a number of sessions over the last 12 to 24 months about compliance generally. I don't know that I want to concentrate greatly on compliance today, but I do really want to focus more on STP2 and what that actually means for organisations. Before I do a little bit of that, I just thought maybe what we might do is cover off just a little bit about Aurion. Maybe if you could just talk through the Aurion story quickly, and then we can start just getting into the nuts and bolts of the sorts of organisations you work with, and then talking about STP2 and specifically.
For sure. So good morning again, everyone. Aurion is a 35-plus-year-old people and payroll solutions business based here in Australia. We are one of Australia's largest and most trusted payroll companies. So we pay about 350,000 Australians every month across a broad range of industries as well. So from starting out in government, we have customers from healthcare, non-for-profits, basically every kind of government, as well as retail and hospitality as well. So we've got a lot of exposure to a lot of different kinds of industries, so we understand a lot of different requirements and challenges that people face or employers face in different industries. So over that 35-year time, we've become experts in delivering cost-effective payroll and HR implementation projects for any size of business. So our smallest size of customer is about 19 employees, and the largest is over 75,000. So we cover the full gamut there. You get 24/7 access to our solutions from any device from Aurion. So we're a truly mobile-first software application. We provide actually two kinds of services from Aurion. We provide a SaaS software solution as well as payroll services, all the way from assisting you to manage your own payroll, all the way up to we fully manage your payroll for you. ISO certified onshore in Australia. A few of the companies we look after right here as well. So you'll see here we've got a bunch of companies from a lot of different industries here. Probably our largest private sector customer is somebody like Domino's, and you'll see a pretty high government representation as well.
Sure. And I guess just before we sort of kick things off, I mean, really one of the interesting things about Aurion generally is that the diversity of sort of clients that you look after, and also the fact that payroll generally is just really complex. We sort of live in a country where payroll law and the compliance and adherence to payroll generally is really complicated and difficult. Maybe you want to just touch a bit on that before we start talking about Single Touch Payroll.
Yeah, no problem at all. We do have a fairly, how I would describe it is a very robust industrial relations system in Australia. So it does mean that from the perspective of an employer, you are expected to pay a lot of different kinds of entitlements to your employees. And depending on the industry you're in, obviously that adds a lot of complexity in your specific space. So one of the, I guess, things that is a benefit of a solution like Aurion is it's very configurable. So over time, so you basically start with a solution that you're able to use to build to your specific business requirements, but not from scratch. So because we've been doing this for 35 years, we're able to give you a lot of advice about, so this is the platform upon which you should start. And then if you've got business specific requirements, for example, allowances that you pay to basically because you're an employer of choice in a particular industry and you want to set a standard, you can sort of automate all of that sort of stuff with Aurion as well. So
sure, good.
in the game,
Okay.
Here to help.
Yeah, got it. Okay, so look, let's touch on STP generally. Maybe we could go back to the origins of it and how it started and sort of how it impacted organisations, and then we can go through there on the sort of changes that are coming. And what businesses need to be prepared for, if that's okay, because really I think that's the key reason we've got so many people in attendance today. They really want to understand more about it. So maybe can you cover that off, please, Reianna?
And I think your suggestion of sort of going back to the start and having a look at the point that we're at now and where we will eventually get to is a good way to frame an STP discussion as well. So STP was first introduced for all Australian businesses in 2019. It's one of the most significant sort of steps towards digital transformation that the whole of Australian government has made. So essentially, what's happening there is in real time, employers are now reporting information to the Australian Taxation Office, which is then made available to employees as well as to the ATO themselves in order to essentially improve decision-making and services. So STP 1 was really about establishing the platform upon which that information is sent. So, and I'm sure everybody is aware of this because we're all doing it now, but essentially we're now in real time sending information to the ATO securely. So yes, STP 1 about establishing the platform and sending through kind of the basic employee information about this is the money that I'm paying people and this is when I paid it to them, sort of thing. So the ATO was getting an idea of entitlements being paid to employees when they're being paid. So that was kind of the original intent. So under STP's legislation, all businesses have to report key payroll information. So now flash forward to 2022, we now have STP Phase 2. So from the 1st of January 2022, STP 2 comes into place, which is where we're starting to report more information. So the foundation is in place. So now it's about adding additional information to support broader decision-making and digital transformation across other government departments. One of the reasons I think it's good to talk about it from the STP 1 foundation and STP 2, more information starting to be collected, is because, of course, there will be subsequent STP steps in the future. So we don't know exactly when those will be, but we can expect as the digital transformation program across the whole of Australian government continues, that there will be more information that's subsequently collected. So it's pretty important. One of the reasons I point that out is it's pretty important when you're looking at payroll operations kind of now and into the future that you take that sort of requirement into consideration. And one of the reasons is STP data can only be sent to the ATO electronically via a certified digital service provider. So you have to work with somebody who has permission essentially to send data to the ATO. So this is usually compliant payroll software and service providers in Australia. So, of course, Aurion is one of those. Under STP Phase 2, employers need to record and send more information about their employees and the payments that have been made. And with STP 2, this is also when the ATO will start sharing payroll data with other government departments like Services Australia, who are also known as Centrelink. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into some of the specifics of STP 2 later in the call.
Okay, so talking about that, let's talk about some of the benefits as well as challenges to employers, because I guess with everything, employers sort of sit in an environment where they've got a lot of compliance requirements, a lot of things that are required of them generally in the course of doing business, and suddenly they've got STP and they've been used to that, and now they've sort of got a newer version. So maybe just please, if you could just share with us what's good about that from an employer's perspective, and also what are some of the pitfalls that people need to be considering as they move into this journey.
So what I'll do here is I'll start with the good news, so the benefits, and then we'll move on to the challenges. For the most part, it's good news though. There's not a lot of bad here. So the benefits are streamlined reporting. So the benefit overall is that whilst there is a little bit of an impost at the beginning of a transition to a particular phase of STP, the ultimate aim of STP is to make data collection from employers easier. So it does mean that we're streamlining, essentially reducing the number of reports that you need to make to different entities by using the one STP platform to send a lot of data through. So that's the benefit of it. And over time, we'll really see that amp up as more and more data is collected and shared across a broader range of government services. Cleaner data. So one of the things I'll definitely say about payroll is that sometimes it can be pretty ambiguous about which sort of things need to be paid and when and what the requirement is. So one of the spin-off effects of STP Phase 2 is that there's now a little bit more clarity about some of the kinds of payments that are made to different kinds of employees and whether or not they need to be made and then reported. So basically, the requirement for it to be reported to the ATO basically means you need to be paying it, right? So if there was any ambiguity about whether or not that needed to be done before, that's kind of starting to clear up a little bit now. So it's easier for you and the ATO to understand who was paid what and why now. It's easier to change between payroll solutions. So new features in STP reporting essentially mean that the STP universe itself is keeping a running total of what you've been paying employees. So this used to be one of the biggest impulses about moving between solutions, is that you would have to do a big reconciliation of this is what was in my old solution and this is what's in the new solution and see if they marry up. STP kind of takes some of that away because essentially we're using the STP platform as the source of truth and then comparing both of the solutions to that. You can also use the STP solution once you've sort of hooked up your new payroll solution, we'll say, you can use the STP solution to pull that data in to sort of say this is what people have been paid to date. So that's so those are the benefits. If we now look at the challenges, so probably a broad way to describe the challenges is that they're largely transitional challenges. So the initial setup of STP2 data can potentially be pretty complex. You've got to add a lot of different rules, leave rules and income types, which could be pretty time consuming and potentially a bit confusing if you don't really know what these are, or if you're not accustomed to splitting these out into different income types. For example, you might just be somebody who's become really accustomed over time to just paying somebody an amount of money that constitutes their salary. But now we're talking about breaking it down into different kinds of components where required. It does make it a slightly more laborious for payroll processing, depending on the kind of solution that you're using. So calculating payments like, I'll pick director's fees because this is the classic one. This is now reportable by STP. So depending on how you potentially do this in your business now, this could be a small change or it could be a pretty significant one. So a lot of businesses are potentially paying this just via their finance system as potentially like a contractor sort of style invoice. So that whole process now means you need to have the discussion with the director to sort of say, okay, we now need to report this to the ATO, which is one discussion. Then you need to change the process from being a finance-driven process to a payroll-driven process. And there's the work change that happens there. And that's just one example of one of the things in the STP that you would need to navigate. Training your team to understand STP2, again, a transitional issue. Once it's up and running, there's not a lot that you need to train people to understand, but there's the initial impulse of sort of going, okay, this income that we used to report as one sort of blob of money is now we're going to break it down into a lot of different things, which means that there's the initial setup of those different entitlement categories, and then of course the ongoing reconciliation of those. Probably the other challenge here that's pretty significant is if you're not using a solution that is STP compliant. So, and this, we'll talk about this as we go through the call. There's a couple of different ways that this can happen. So going back to the idea that we're storing a lot of different types of income. So one of the requirements then is you need to have the capacity to store that. So if you don't have a solution that sort of allows you to put in your own codes for allowances or different kinds of reportable expenses, for example, then you're going to run into some challenges when you need to report that. So that's it's probably a good idea to start getting your head around your own solution and whether it has the capacity for you to record everything that you need to send through the ATO net. Okay.
Which probably leads then to, let's put a quick guide. I think I've got a slide up here, but a quick guide to the STP2 changes maybe you could just go through some of those. I think it may help the people on call just to be able to get it from a top level.
Cool. So, and one of the things that, I'll do this at a pretty high level.
Yeah.
One of the things that I would advocate before I go here is the ATO themselves actually have a really excellent employer guide, which will help you to, it's a little bit of a tick and flick matrix, help you to understand which of these potential changes will apply to your business and what you potentially need to do. So that can be downloaded from the ATO's website. It's a fairly hefty sort of a document, but there's just one section of it which has that sort of tick and flick matrix, which is, I think, at the back. It's about 4 pages, which makes it much easier to then go back to the rest of the document and read the details. So we've essentially borrowed some of the quick guide stuff from the ATO guide. I'd recommend everybody go back to it. It's a great guide. If you're unsure about where to find it or how to get it, just get in touch with us and somebody will be able to help you. Okay, so again, we'll start with some of the big ticket items. So child support garnishee deductions amount. So you can deduct these amounts via payroll now, so you don't need to submit a separate deduction report to the child support agency. So this is an example of a change that's really streamlining processing for employers. You can basically deduct these amounts via payroll like you would in any other kind of deduction, and use the STP platform to communicate that. Income stream selection. So you need to specify the types of payments made to an employee in a new field called an income stream collection. So that includes income type, payment type, and the country code as well, depending on where these payments are made. So this is probably the biggest area where you're going to need to do a little bit of research or have a discussion with say, one of us or your own supplier, for example, to understand what kind of income you pay and how that now needs to be reported. Tax file number declaration. So we seem to have sort of alternated between things that are great and things that are potentially not so great. Here's one of the other great ones. Tax file number declaration. So you don't have to do the manual tax file number declarations or the separate ones if you're using an automated system for this as well. You can now just do this via STP. So it's essentially you're indicating in your STP feed to the ATO, this person, they now work for me. So that's a reduction in processing as well. Termination reason. So you don't need to issue an employment separation certificate anymore, another benefit. You do, however, need to supply a reason for terminating or somebody leaving your business as part of your STP data that is sent to the ATO. So this is a little bit of it's a good thing in that you don't have, there's less for you to do from a termination processing perspective, but there's also the requirement that you need to be able to record and send to the ATO why somebody's separated from your business. Tax treatment codes. So you don't have to calculate tax differently, but you do have to report the treatment codes, which you didn't really have to do before. So it's again, not a change to processing, but a change to reporting. And it's something where you need to be aware of your capacity to actually record that information so you can send it. Lump sum E. So here we are back in the categories of things that are designed to save time. So you'll no longer be required to provide a lump sum E letter. We mentioned this earlier. So number 7, transitioning employees from another payroll system. So you can link somebody's pay ID from a previous payroll platform to the new one so that you're able to use the STP platform essentially as the source of truth to bring information into your new payroll solution. Paid leave. So this is something where you now actually need to assign a specific leave type code which describes exactly what that leave is for. So this is again really removing some of the ambiguity around leave. So you might have a system where basically any kind of leave is annual leave, it's a big bucket. That's not necessarily going to meet the requirement anymore. So it's something that you need to do your own independent research about. But paid parental leave, for example, would have a different code to annual leave if that's not something that you're doing now. Negative year-to-date reporting. So the ATO will allow you to report negative year-to-date amounts in your STP report. New allowances, so gross payments will be disaggregated. So that theme is through this entire list. We're disaggregating into separately itemized components. So it's not about sort of reporting this employee got paid this amount of money anymore, which was a bit of an STP1 thing. Now it's this employee got paid this amount of money and it was made up of these components. Salary sacrifice is now something that you will have to report. So that wasn't included in STP1 either.
Okay. No, and that's good. Yeah, no, and that's good. And I know there was a number of those, but I mean, they are critical changes to STP. I suppose, and without concerning or getting people to be overly concerned in terms of this, I think that there's probably a few points that people just on this call, particularly a number of the executives, and we have a lot of them on call today, just need to be aware of in terms of if they get it right or wrong, or they're not. Maybe they're challenged by it a little. Maybe you can talk through some of the key aspects that they'll need to be across.
Sure. So as mentioned earlier, STP is part of a broader government transformation effort. So it's important to understand the intent of the effort is to move more services to being digital and online for both employers and consumers of those services, so employees. The STP program will continue well beyond STP2. So there'll be an STP Phase 3. I don't know what it'll be called. Potentially there'll be a new name by then, but this requirement to continually provide information in real time about what you pay employees will continue to grow. So it's important to have the right kind of platform in place that you understand what you're paying people and are able to report that if required. Your business, if you get STP reporting wrong. So this is a really important one, particularly as we get closer to the compliance date, and I guess employers start to get a little bit more anxious about their level of readiness. No one is going to knock on your door on the 2nd of January and sort of say, where's my data? Everybody is here to work with employers, particularly at the moment, because obviously there are a lot of different pressures that face businesses with the pandemic and a lot of other things that are going on. So the system as a whole is here to work with you as an employer to help you to get to the date. If you don't know what your supplier's plans are in regards to STP at this stage, the first port of call is definitely to contact them and say, how do you plan to support me to become STP2 compliant? So the ATO, they do have a deferral program. So a deferral program is essentially a program for payroll software vendors and suppliers to work with the ATO on behalf of their customer communities to extend the compliance date. So for example, Aurion has worked with the ATO to get a deferral date that's in the future. So that means for our customers who are not ready to make the transition to STP2 by the compliance date, they have the opportunity via us to work with the ATO to extend that date out a little bit. So that's the other thing, is if you don't believe that you are going to be ready for that time frame, is to, again, talk to your supplier or talk to somebody like us, for example, to understand, okay, is there an option for me to work with the ATO to extend that date? And it's always there. Amount of data being collected and managed by your payroll team is increasing. So it's important to consider, do I have the capacity within my business to actually do this? So this is from a couple of perspectives. Do I have the knowledge capacity, as well as do I have obviously the human resource available to do this? So you need to constantly sort of update and change systems to be compliant, and you need to retrain your team every time this happens. So it can introduce a little bit of an impost on you going forward. It's important to balance that up against the time that you save by not having to sort of send, for example, separate child support agency reports, etc. So there are cost benefits there, but the risk is also, you should profile it for your own business. And if you're having trouble understanding what a risk profile in relation to payroll for your business looks like, please just get in touch and we can help you to understand what you need to consider. Reporting key payroll data in real time can increase risk for both you and your employees, especially if it's not right. So, and I want to stress here, we're not talking about intentionally incorrect information. If you're reporting things that aren't right, obviously that's a bit of a flag for the ATO if that continues over a period. But it's also something that you then have to correct. So it's a lot of rework for you too. So important that the information that you have the opportunity to check your payroll data before you actually send it. Awards and employment legislation, these change a lot. So keeping up to date with that, as well as the requirement to report all of the stuff in real time, is something that you also need to take into consideration when you're thinking about payroll management in your business as well. So in the past 12 months, there have been over 100 award type changes, probably 150 by now. So as business conditions change and employment conditions change more generally, this will continue to happen. And it's, again, something that you need to be able to, you need to have the peace of mind that within your business, you have the capacity to manage these kinds of changes and the speed with which they happen, which is increasing. So STP reduces the reporting burden for businesses, but it also increases the risk, hand in hand, of being penalised for non-compliance. So it isn't something that happens really at the moment a great deal, that we're using the STP platform as a way of sort of measuring compliance with requirements. But it's important to consider that eventually it will head that way. Like if we can see that people aren't paying the right sort of entitlements over time, you can expect that there'll be a few questions over time. So it's important that you have the right tools and advice in place to support you, I guess. It's probably the way you do it.
Makes sense. I'm just conscious of time. Probably five minutes in the main part of the session, and we've got some questions. And there's already some questions in there, so I might leave some of this, which is the the ideal STP solution type part. I think you've covered a lot of that. Is there anything specifically just on that you want to touch on before we start really working through what we think is an analysis of people's current sort of payroll solution, just to make sure the checks and balances are right for them for the moment?
Sure. So an ideal STP ready payroll solution. So going back to the idea that this is an evolving digital transformation initiative that will extend across the entire Australian government over time, you need to be working with a supplier who's committed to continually providing STP updates and actually essentially acts as the conduit between yourself and the ATO in terms of understanding STP legislation changes. So you want somebody who proactively sort of says, this is what's going to be happening, this is what you need to do, this is what I'm going to do for you, this is when it's going to happen. So you need that really proactive sort of relationship there.
Sure.
You need a solution that is going to manage your entire employee data requirements. So you don't want things to be over here and then having to sort of manually pull it into one sort of central solution so you can send it. It's not a pretty solution, and it's basically rife for inaccuracy there. Onboarding and terminating is automated and electronic. So you want something where you can do everything electronically, because that puts you in the best position to be able to communicate that electronically to the ATO when you need to. You want something that calculates complex entitlements automatically. So again, rife for inaccuracy is you having to sort of go, okay, it's this much money total, but I think it's this much of this, and calculate it on the spreadsheet and then put it into some sort of software application after that is really a path to all sorts of problems. Something that manages and administers leave balances and when employees take it automatically. Again, you don't want to be stuck with the impost of having to do that, because that's really leads to some problems. Something that set up and automated, probably the one thing, because I know James is going to wind me up in a second. Something that allows you to audit all pay records to confirm their accuracy. So a couple of reasons for this: if you're sending it to the ATO, you want to know that it's right, as well as you want to know that it's right for within the context of your own business as well.
Sure. Okay, with a couple of minutes that we have in the main session left, Ray, I just wanted to maybe just touch on payroll processes generally and some of the challenges that you're finding that organisations are facing. And I know that there's still a lot of organisations that either do it themselves wholly, or sometimes they'll give some of the payroll responsibility to someone like Aurion. And I guess there's a lot of flexibilities in the way that organisations work. But maybe you could just talk us through very quickly, what people need to think about in terms of analysing their current payroll process.
Sure. So earlier in this session, when we were talking about the idea of payroll risk profile, these are the questions that help you identify what yours is. So how you currently do it, whether this is something that's entirely reliant on humans within your business, humans supported by a tool that automates some of this, or humans who are experts at payroll processing outside your business. It's important to understand what the best model is for you, how you know it's been done right, what role you play in making sure that it's right. Is it 100% on you? Do you have a supplier who takes some of that risk away, etc.? Probably the other thing that I would if I were to pick the high points from this list, how many people are involved in your payroll process? So there's an optimal number. You don't want this to be totally streamlined because you need it to go through a couple of sets of eyes just for accuracy and checking purposes.
Sure.
What's the process for identifying mistakes and fixing them? And what impact does it have on your staff and your employer profile as a whole, your payroll operation? So these are the important things to consider. Oh my goodness, we've still got one more. Sorry, James.
No. Look, that's okay. In fact, look, I mean, I think some of those questions that we might put through to the audience a bit and let them be able to digest that separately, because there are a few questions coming up. But I guess one of the things I'd say to the many people that have joined us today, this is really the main session now. And so if you have other meetings you've got to go into, by all means, please do that. We will get you a copy of this presentation. And if there's any specific questions, we'll reach out to you. I think one of the most important things to understand is that Aurion as an organisation can do as little or as much to do with your payroll as required. So it's not, having to look into your organisation, take the whole thing over, and you basically leave it at arm's length, although certainly Aurion can do that. But there are a lot of organisations that just get Aurion in to sort of help and assist in certain areas of payroll, certainly when potentially payroll people that you have within your organisations go on leave, or whether or not you feel like you may have a compliance issue, etc. So there's always a good reason to reach out to Aurion and have a chat. So that would be the main part that I would probably add to the discussion that Reianna's had with us today. So again, those of you who had to leave, by all means, thanks so much for your time, and I certainly appreciate it. And with that, I would just say that we've got a couple of questions that the audience has sort of asked us. Ree, one of the first ones was it was the understanding that that organisations would have probably until March next year before actually before actually asking for a deferment. Is that right, or is it really that they need to start asking for that in January?
Well, to be honest, I would be asking for it now. So going back to the message before, the compliance date is the 1st of January. So what I would be encouraging for your own peace of mind, as well as to validate what the actual requirement is for your business. If you have an ATO relationship manager, you should be working with them to understand when you can defer your transition to STP2. Or if you're working with a supplier like a Reianna, a payroll software provider, for example, or a services provider, I would be asking them directly the question about when I can defer to. So it actually varies. So some, like I believe we published ours, so I'll put it out there. On behalf of our customers, we have a deferral that's in place until September next year. So basically, we canvassed most of our customers and sort of said, what sort of time frame around your other business priorities would you be looking at? Would the longest, and then we basically picked the longest out of the customer feedback that we got, which was September. So all of the vendors all have different plans in place based upon their own customer communities. And that is something that the ATO very proactively worked with us about. So they asked us sort of, how ready do you think your customers are going to be, and when would be a better date? And that sort of formed the basis of us getting a deferral on behalf of our customer community. So that basically gives you a bit of an idea of, it depends on who you work with and what arrangements they have in place with the ATO specifically for their customer community. So first up would be your own vendor. If you're not satisfied with the answer that you get out of them and you don't have an ATO relationship manager that you can contact directly, I would potentially come back to us. Always happy to have a chat with anybody about what the options are if you don't think you're going to be in a place to understand your options by the end of the year. I would always encourage, for your own peace of mind, and you'll get lots of different answers to this depending on who you ask. For your own peace of mind, the compliance date is the 1st of January. So you should, in your own head, have a good, clear idea of when you're going to transition, and also that the ATO understands that from you. So that everybody understands that you've made that decision and that it's been validated as an okay path.
Thanks for that, Ree. Another question is really about when Aurion goes into organisations and starts to advise or take on some or all of the payroll processes, what are the most common challenges that Aurion find? What do you guys find generally when you're going into those organizations as some of the trouble or trigger points or challenges that organizations are going through that you need to get addressed pretty quickly?
Probably two broad categories. Aurion is, as I mentioned earlier, is a very complex payroll system. So if you're coming from a solution where potentially a lot of things were done outside the payroll solution, or we're talking about you didn't categorize specific kinds of payments in different ways, when you move to Aurion, you'll have to make those decisions. So there is a big transition when you go into a solution like Aurion. The ultimate payoff is then, after that's done, a lot of the calculation and interpretation of entitlements is automated. So you get all of the time that you initially spent back. So there's the initial investment to get to that automation point. That interestingly in itself is the other challenge, is that a lot of stuff in a solution like Aurion is automated. So there's getting your business as a whole used to that idea of, okay, the solution does these sorts of things, and now I'm more in a position of, I'm in an oversight position and also a place where I add value to the broader business, as opposed to being somebody who punches in a lot of numbers. So those are the two broad sort of issues that I would say, well, sorry, challenges, but neither of those is probably the right word. The things to consider when you're moving to a solution like Aurion.
And do you find that compliance or lack of compliance, not necessarily intentionally, but just unintentional breaches or some challenges with compliance, is something that you commonly find when you start working with organizations?
I don't have the exact percentages. There is a part of the Aurion setup program that goes through a bit of a data cleansing and analysis stage, and that includes something like a parallel pay run, where we run two pay runs side by side and compare the outputs and then figure out which one is doing the right thing. I would say, upwards of 90% of those cases will identify something. So it is, and it will be, for example, that leave balance is potentially incorrect in one system because we haven't been calculating this kind of entitlement, or we should have been calculating it based on the hours that somebody worked versus the way we were doing now, which was a static number of hours. There's all these sorts of things that always kind of surface when you're going through the setup process. So I would say we do strike a lot of compliance issues at that point. And I think it's an important activity for customers to go through as well, because it helps you understand, okay, there's a lot of different dimensions to compliance as well. And when we have the initial conversation with somebody who's having a conversation with us about moving to a solution like Aurion, that's one of the things that we identify is, what are you paying people now? Where are the sort of bugbears? Where are the points at which you manually calculate things? Because this is generally a bit of an opportunity for inaccuracies to sort of come into it. Even though everybody is very well intentioned, that's one of the things that happens.
Right, thanks, Reianna. Another question here being, if I need to get a new STP compliant solution, is there any chance that's going to be ready and set up before the 1st of January?
So really two answers to this one. Yes, absolutely. So the shortest implementation we've ever done is probably a week. I'd say, you can get it done in as little as 3 weeks. It really depends on the availability of resources in your business as opposed to ours. So that's the short answer to that. That would be for more of a managed payroll service style. Even however, SaaS software solutions, they don't take that long to put in place. One of the other things I would be encouraging, though, is, as I mentioned before, you don't need to have everything in place for the 1st of January. You just need to have a conversation with your supplier, or directly with the ATO, or with a supplier like us if you want to move, and then have a plan in place which you can then communicate to the ATO. So that's what I'd encourage. Discuss with your supplier if you don't really think that they're providing an opportunity for you to get to STP2 in a way that's going to satisfy your business or the ATO. Have a discussion with the ATO, and then alternatively have a discussion with us. Always happy to have the chat with you about what your needs are.
Okay, and another one being with someone who is pretty intent on trying to do it themselves internally, which is totally normal because there's a lot of organisations that do it themselves. So if they are doing it themselves, how long should they expect for them to be able to be set up in their own systems and be compliant? I mean, is that realistically possible? Or I suppose it's possible, but does it take a longer period of time than working with someone that's sort of in and around it every day? What are your thoughts on that?
It's possible, but it's definitely risky. And it actually, going back to the, it's one of the things I was going to mention when you showed the outsourced payroll slide before. When it comes to considering outsourced payroll, we generally have I think a tendency to think about it in terms of direct cost per production of a pay slip, for example. That's the usual metric. It's important to consider that there are a really broad range of costs associated with running an optimal payroll operation. So it's not really just about that one cost. And the other thing is, you should always at least have the conversation with somebody about whether it is more cost effective to do it with experts who then shoulder some of that risk on your behalf. But if you are planning on doing it yourself, there are a bunch of great tools that the ATO have supplied to get you on the right track. So as I mentioned before, the employer guide, which has the tick and flick kind of section, which allows you to go, yes, I pay these kinds of income types. And then it provides you with a bit of an overview of what you're going to need to do. So that effectively is a bit of a cheat sheet of these are the things I need to do. So having said that, it's obviously very difficult and it will change from business to business. It's difficult to understand which of those things are going to apply to which kinds of businesses. So the first step would be to do that. And then for all of the things where you've ticked yes, then you would need to go through and implement the changes into your solution. If you are not an expert, and if you're potentially working with a solution that doesn't allow you to capture the data in the way that you think it potentially should, that will be a risk that could take you, if we're talking about a vendor that needs to make a software change to support you, that could be anywhere between weeks to months. So really important to understand that early. If there's data that's missing from your solution, how that's going to, what the path is for that to be there and available for you to use, because that really is a red flag, because there's not much you can do about that. But in terms of changing your own business processes to move some things from finance to payroll, or having the conversation with employees, it's another important consideration. You'll also need to communicate with your employees that things happen a little bit differently now. So things like child support, for example, if you're paying that as a deduction as opposed to sending a report to the child support agency, there's potentially some processing differences there that employees detect as well. So you've got to make sure you communicate with them. It's a multifaceted sort of a transition. There's communicating with your business, communicating with your employees, putting in place all of the changes, testing it, getting all the stuff back from the ATO. The ATO, when you send data to them via STP, will send you a summary of what you sent to them back with any errors in it. So you've got to do a bit of a reconciliation of all of that stuff. So the short answer to your question, James, a long way to get there. Yes, you can do it yourself. It will take you a while. It is pretty risky. I would definitely advise consulting with an expert if you can. Okay.
I've got quite a few more questions, Reianna, but we probably won't have enough time for it in this session.
And send them through.
Some are through compliance and some other areas just generally, and what people need to think about, not just with STP2, but just about payroll processes, etc. So I think we'll reach out to people individually that have asked questions that we haven't been able to get to. And I suppose I'd end the session again, just thanking you for your time, Reianna. I know how busy you are, and particularly this time of year, there's just so many things going on. But we can tell just by so many people attending today how this topic is something that a number of executives are not so, I wouldn't say concerned about, but really need to, and it's clear that they want to learn more about. And I think today's session has been a really good overview for people to sort of get that. So I really want to thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity to get out there and spread the good word of STP2. It's been great. I've had a great time.
No problem. And to all of you that have attended today, thank you for your time as well. Certainly, you know, we've got all sorts of things going on around Australia. For you guys to be able to take, you know, half an hour, 3/4 of an hour out of your time and be able to spend with us to be able to learn a bit more is great. We'll provide a recording of this session, which we'll distribute to you all, together with any fact sheets or some other things or questions generally that we think would be relevant for you to make sure that your process generally is compliant, but also maybe just a couple of things that touch on STP2. And of course, Reianna and her entire team stand ready to be able to offer any sort of support should anyone would like some, you know, further advice on how to be able to implement this properly. So with that, I'll end proceedings. Again, Reianna, thanks for your time, and to everyone attending, thanks so much for yours as well. We certainly appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Good on you. Thank you.